It's hard to act natural when you talk.
Well, I learned from a friend that showed me why. Instead of asking why, start asking why not. Time flies when you're having fun. Time flies when you're lying in the sun. Bit by bit, the older that we get, the faster it tick, 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 ticks. Time flies. Whoa, whoa, time flies.
Well, good afternoon. Hey, welcome to Marshfield's Old School Times. Here we are again in the old school Grand Central, Mr. Ballard's old counseling office. And I've got some very special friends with me today. I've got Webster County Clerk Stan Whitehurst with me today.
Good afternoon.
And his lovely wife, Julie, has joined us. Now, she's a Niangua-ite, so we won't hold that against her because there's always some good stories that come from Niangua. So we're glad to have them with us, and we're going to have a little bit of fun here for the next hour. Glad you joined us today. Want to thank Logan Fraker, our technical advisor and producer of the show, back behind the screen. He also has a tech zone. He does computer repair work, buys and sells computers and parts, and if you need anything done on your computer, holler at Logan. Also want to always mention Dennis Beck's Time Flies. We open our show with a little snippet from that song that he wrote, and it's very appropriate for what we do here, and we appreciate Dennis for that. So today we're going to talk a little bit about obviously going to school in Marshfield in the 80s and Niangua. And we're also going to talk about a little bit about Webster County, the history of Webster County, maybe some things that you and I didn't know. Stan's he's a very knowledgeable person when it comes to Webster County as the county clerk, and has been now for how many years?
25 years.
25 years. And if you think about that, you know, going back to probably into the 60s, there's only been 3 county clerks. Stan, and then before that, Marianne Ankrum and Lois Minor. Is that right?
And actually look back, and before that was Orvin Davis, which actually gets you back to the 1950 election. So everything
50s.
from
Wow.
1950 forward has been covered by 4 different people.
It's almost 75 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, these folks have just so much institutional knowledge that we want to make sure, and that's what we're trying to do here, is to get this information documented, so future generations can learn a little bit about Webster County, about Marshfield, about our community, and going to school at Marshfield. So we're really having some fun with this, and I'm really thankful that you guys joined us today. Really
Thanks.
appreciate it. So why don't we just start out, Stan, why don't you and Julie both, you guys can tag team however you want to do it, but why don't you talk about growing up, and we'll talk about your families, and you know, I know you all got long-time Webster County families, and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll jump in first and say I had a great childhood, very lucky to have long-term roots in the county. My mother was a carpenter from the Seymour area. My father obviously was a Whitehurst, from the Marshfield area. And both families go back to the 1870s in Webster County. I grew up between Marshfield and Elkland. And I just have really great memories. One of my early memories is being maybe 4 years old, sitting on the kitchen table and looking out the back window. Spring day, you know, that deep green everywhere, you know, you had open pasture between us and the woods, and just thinking, you know, this is like heaven, you know, being 4 and thinking. I remember thinking about the lyrics of the song Amazing Grace. And the last verse is, when we've been there 10,000
Right.
years, right? And in my child's mind, I was thinking, well, maybe when that 10,000 years is up, we can come back.
Oh, wow.
Because I just, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
had 2 loving parents, great brother and sister, just a really idyllic childhood, and
Yeah.
have always felt a lot of affection for the community. Likewise, Julie's got long.
Well, I'm
roots
sure
as well.
with knowing your mother, she must have not been home. It must have been your dad with you that day, or you wouldn't have been sitting on the kitchen table. You'd been sitting in the chair. But
Right,
anyway,
right. True
yeah,
enough.
Yeah. Julie, how about you?
Well, I grew up in Niangua. My father's family are the Stubers, and my grandmother was a longtime educator, and then my mother's family were the Colonas here in Marshfield, out off J Highway, and they were a farming family, and you know, we had lots of good times with both families, and good memories, lots of fun times with our cousins on both sides, and just lots of fun.
Yeah. Now that reminds me of I can remember my Uncle Glenn talking about out in Kelowna country, which, you don't think about this, but this is what made me think of it. There was a group of, you might say, Italian families that were out there, not just the
Yes.
Kelownas, but there were some other ones too. I can't recall the exact
Like-
names of them, but
maybe the Parolinis.
Parolinis,
and,
Bertaldis, some of those
mhm.
names that I can remember, and you don't think about that. But obviously, this was way before the interstate. This was way back, in the 1800s, probably when the families, or the early 1900s at least, when they came, and so there was a settlement, and they kind of all lived in the same area.
Yeah.
Prince of Valley, and
Yeah.
I can't remember, but I know there were several.
I can remember, being maybe like 8, 10 years old and going to visit my grandparents. And that was before they had built the overpass at Marshfield, and, mother being there, the street that comes by
Jefferson.
Sonic, yes, and having to gun the car to go across I-44 to get out
Yeah.
across there
Right.
where Walmart is now.
Route 66 had already been bypassed the town, but it wasn't the interstate yet, so it still had the broken accesses and so forth. Yeah, I remember that very well. Of course, we would ride from my grandparents' house at the Y, which is where Revell Insurance is. That was my
Okay.
grandmother's house. We would ride there on the back of the pickup with the tailgate down and our feet hanging down, down that same path to Uncle Gene's farm, which was where the feed store had just passed Don Vance. I mean, didn't think anything about it. There weren't
Right.
seat belts yet,
Yeah.
and yeah, those were probably the early '60s, mid '60s in those
Well,
days.
we even rode in the back of the pickup in the 70s,
Yeah,
just sit on
yeah.
the hub and
Yep.
ride down the road.
Absolutely. So you got a brother and a sister, right? And
My brother Steve lives here in town. My sister Sally married Robert Vestal, and they live in Springfield.
of course they're all Marshfield graduates as well. And then your dad passed away when you were
When
a
I
young
was in
man.
high school, in 1984. So
Right.
it's coming up on 40 years,
Wow.
which is
Man.
kind of hard to imagine.
Yeah. And then Julie, your family, you've got siblings.
Yes, I have 2 sisters and a brother. And my brother is a dairy farmer in Niangua and has a family of 4. And then my other sister, she's in Niangua. And then I have a sister in St. Louis.
Right. And then the Niangua Library is named after one of your
My
kinfolk.
grandmother.
Yeah, your grandmother. Talk about that just a little bit. Talk about her.
My grandmother is Vivian Stuber, and she was an educator in Niangua, starting out in country school, teaching, in one-room school, and then moving on to, the Niangua school. And she served various classrooms, was a kindergarten teacher when I was in kindergarten, but I didn't want anybody to know that she was my grandmother. So she was Mrs. Stuber to me. And I remember one particular time midwinter, I accidentally said grandma. And another student said, "Did you call her grandma?" And I'm like, "No, I lied to him." And then felt tremendous guilt because I had lied, that about her, but I didn't want anybody to know that she was my grandmother when I was in kindergarten. But she went on to be the elementary principal before she retired.
Right. And I know she was very well respected in that community,
Well,
and obviously to have the library named for her shows that for sure. So Stan, you graduated 1984, and talk a little bit about and Julie, what year did you graduate?
1984.
Same in Niangua.
Yes.
Okay. So did you two meet in high school or after?
Well,
It
I
was
mean,
out.
I knew who Stanley
Yeah.
was from the pool because he was a
Okay.
lifeguard.
Okay. Okay.
But I mean, we didn't.
You didn't really date
No.
in
I
school.
was the
Okay.
world's
no,
most
Yeah.
appeal lifeguard.
Most people.
And he wore a towel on his head. Distinctly remember that.
You didn't have to really go there. But
They didn't mistaken you for Brad Pitt or anything
no,
like
they
that.
did not.
Okay.
But, no.
So tell me what it was like. And I graduated in '77, so I was already kind of long gone, I guess you might say, or I guess I was around here, but I wasn't in the young people scene so much. So tell us what it was like in '84. You had changes going on, the cyber, like I know Max Headroom and all that was coming in about that time, wasn't it? And cyber stuff,
MTV was
MTV,
brand
and
new.
so what was going on in the cultural world, or even in Marshfield? You know, where did you guys hang out or whatever?
Well, one of the big things to do, of course, was cruise town, which meant drive the loop from Dairy Queen to what was then the Get and Go, which is now
Get and Go. Now, see, we did the square, so you went to the Get and Go. All right, where Rapid Roberts is now.
Yes.
Rapid Roberts is now.
Yeah.
And we would.
Was
we
it
would
fairly
drive
new then? That store fairly
Yes,
new.
it was.
Yes.
It
Okay.
was.
There'd been an old funeral home, or the old Rainy,
The Rainy Funeral.
original Rainy Funeral Home. And then they built the new block, or the rock castle on Washington later.
For most of my childhood, that empty, vacant funeral home was there across from Jim and Wayne Station.
Right. Right.
And they tore that down and built the Get and Go.
Yeah.
And one reason it was on the loop was it had a Pac-Man machine.
Oh, okay.
Or
Okay.
another electronic game called Joust.
I got you.
So,
Which we have downstairs in the retro zone, by the way.
There you go. Good
Come and see Landon tonight from 4 to 9, and be happy to play those games. Yeah,
R.A. Barr was the superintendent.
Mr. Barr. That was
basic-
about his last year.
It was.
Yeah.
He retired our senior
Right.
year.
Yeah.
And Bill Walker was the high school principal.
This was George Ballard's counseling office, or it was at least when I went to school. Assume it still was when you were here.
Basically, like you said, culturally, MTV was just brand new, and you could watch music videos, once a week on something called Friday night videos on late night network television. So that was just really beginning to kind of come on.
Right.
So it was still the culture was pretty rural. I mean, most everybody wanted to be country,
Right.
Country
Yeah.
music was the big thing.
Yeah.
Now,
See, a lot of that started after I left school. It seems like you had the Cowboys, and you had the Preppies, and you had those kind of tag name. We didn't really have that. You may have kind of had it, but you didn't really have names associated. But I think that had kind of came into the schools by that time, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, our class, Marshall '84, we got along really well, mixed really well together. We were pretty close. Had about 140 people in it. There were a couple things that happened while we were going through school. Our sophomore year was the year there was the explosion in the elementary school.
Yes. Yes.
And it was one of our classmates that was killed.
Yes.
And of course, we finished that year basically kind of sectioned off into little groups in the girls' gym, which is now, I guess, Webster Elementary.
Webster Elementary, yeah.
And just in kind of small groups, and kind of finished out the year. Then
And now there you go. There's a cultural shift. We couldn't have a boys' gym being the big gym and the girls' gym the little gym. Now they have to. I mean, just think how people thought then. You would never do that today, and we shouldn't. But I mean, that would be a cultural change for sure.
That's true. Also, ours was the class where on that senior skip week, where the motorcycles the two guys rode the motorcycles through the hallways, kind of the senior parade.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Kind of remember that. Yeah. Yeah. Julie, how about Niangua? How many was in
there
your
were
class?
23 people in
23,
my
that's
graduating class.
Pretty decent sized
Yeah.
class for Niangua in those days, I would
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, probably average.
Yeah.
I mean, for that time of year.
Yeah.
But what were some of the other things that you wanted?
Oh,
to
just what'd you do? I mean,
Well,
you
we
hung out
came
the
to
pool. You said you
Marshfield.
came to Marshfield.
Yeah,
hung
we
out the
came to
pool.
Marshfield.
Yeah.
That was the thing to do, was
Right.
to come to Marshfield, and like Stanley, we would cruise the loop and go to the townhouse. I mean, that was a big deal to
Yes.
go to the Townhouse Restaurant or Dairy
Yeah.
Queen or Pizza Hut
Okay.
to hang out, eat, that kind of thing.
The Ritz Theater had already closed.
Right.
You had the bowling alley, which was it out on the spur, or was
Yeah.
it okay? Still
On the spur, whenever.
not out by
Not on
across
the
where it's
map,
at
never
now.
did.
Okay, it was the spur. Yeah, it's a lot of similarities to when I graduated, but
My friend and I would come to Marshfield to go to the football games because we didn't have football at Niangua, so that was kind of like a fall thing to come to Marshfield to the football games.
Right. So after you graduated, well, first of all, you both were heavily involved in music in school, right? Like I know you were in the
Stanley
vocal
more so
music,
than
and you were in the band too.
In the band, we had a great band.
Right.
Also, our graduating year was also the year D. Lewis retired.
Oh, it was. Okay. All right. So you did have Dee then. Good. Yes, and I know you've sang over the years at, gosh, funerals, and probably how many national anthems have you sang at events? I mean, if you're there and everybody's like, oh, who's going to sing the national anthem? There's Stan, he'll do it. You know.
I'm glad to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I lost count, but really, we had a new music teacher when I got into junior high. Her name was Carol Wilson. It was her
Yeah.
first year teaching. And
My brother Barth thought a lot of Carol.
oh yeah,
was-
she's great.
yeah.
She's great.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was just 4 of us boys that were kind of willing to take the risk and join the choir in that first year, because Richard McGee had retired.
Sleeping, okay.
And and then a 5th kind of joined us that way through. And anyway, wound up being a great experience. The choir grew by the time we graduated school, and several of us got a chance to be all-state singers.
Wow.
And that actually got me a scholarship to attend the University of Tulsa, was through vocal music.
Awesome.
And so Marshfield really helped us out that
You
way.
bet. You were fortunate to be able to have Richard as a director and Carol, because 2 of them were, I mean, Richard was unbelievable vocalist as well. Julie, you're in the piano business, right?
Well,
Or
I
you
was,
played the piano. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Rose
Yeah.
Kittrell was my piano teacher for
Mhm.
many, many years.
Yes. She taught a lot of folks, for sure. So you graduated, went to Tulsa,
Mhm.
and how about you, Julie?
I graduated and I went to what is now OTC.
Okay.
It was Graphotech at that time, and,
Yep.
and went through their dental assisting program.
Right. Okay.
And
And then you started assisting the dentist.
yes,
pretty quick after, right?
Yes, I did my practicum with Kim Davison, who is a Marshfield alumni.
Dr. Kim was out on the corner.
It's where Dr. Kanzler,
Dr.
I
Kanzler
think
is,
Dr.
yeah.
Kanzler maybe still
Yeah.
owns that building. But then
Yeah.
Dr. Joe Kerwin bought Dr. George Melton's practice, and I actually worked for Dr. Kerwin that summer before I went to dental assisting school, and then went back to work for him, and I just finished 39 years of working for him
39
June
years.
30th.
Golly, you started when you was 10, right?
Yes, I
Yeah.
did. That's right.
Wow. That's a long time. So you retired, huh?
Well, I
From-
guess.
from that.
From
From
that,
dental
yes,
assisting.
From that,
So-
yes. I don't know,
Well,
but
congratulations.
Saw lots of Marshfield people and got to know lots of Marshfield people through the dental practice all through the years.
Right. I think, so you both were in college, you come out, and what did you do when you got your job,
I
Stan?
came back in the early 90s.
Uh-huh.
And basically, the way I started out, I wanted to go into teaching and started substituting and that type of thing. And I was a little, maybe a little naive, and I didn't know how to put things into context. I got along great with the kids. And then I would go sit in the teacher's lounge, and I would listen to the teachers that had been my teachers.
Yeah.
Kind of talking, and they just seemed like they were so unhappy. You know? Their culture was,
After 25 years or whatever.
terrible. And,
Yeah.
you know, I thought, oh man, I don't know if I want to go into this if it's so
Yeah.
bad. So now I look back and think, that was just the culture.
Yeah,
You know, they loved what they were doing, et cetera, et cetera. But it was a lot cooler to talk about the negative than it was the positive.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went ahead and decided not to go into teaching, got into the insurance business. And that's about the time Julie and I met. We met because my brother and sister-in-law, Steve, and his wife Darcy, were remodeling an old house.
Mhm.
And so there was a group of us all about the same age that were always over at their place, helping to remodel. And it just seemed like this one girl, every time she came, she brought a lemon pie.
Wow. You were friends with Darcy, I assume.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
I met
that's
them
cool.
later.
That's a neat story. Lemon pie. That's
Yeah.
great. I like lemon
I
pie.
think the last one she made was 1990.
I don't think so.
Oh gosh, you didn't have to throw that.
That's
in.
all right.
That didn't get you any
Later.
points.
Yeah,
That didn't
that's
get you any
cool.
points. And then, how many years until your child came along?
Oh, 10. We were married 10 years.
10 years
Yes.
before Betsy came.
And then
Okay,
Betsy was born. Yes.
awesome. Well, tell us about Betsy.
Well, stealing.
Now we do have we still got a lot of time, but don't take all the time.
Oh,
But I know you want to probably.
Well, we were married for 10 years,
Yeah.
and we had a lot of time together, and that was great. But the reason that we waited was we weren't sure that we could, frankly, have children, and it turned out great that we were. She's been a blessing.
Yeah.
My joke is, you know, we were about to give up hope, and then we finally figured out what we needed was just one more margarita. And
Your mom's not watching,
no,
is
well,
she?
she was maybe, but it's we call it, you know, it's been great, and
That's great.
she just finished her. She's actually just getting ready to start her 3rd year at MSU.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
She's going into nutrition and dietetics.
Wow, that's a great career these days, for sure. I think that's something that we all should really look at a little closer, for sure. I mean, especially when you get to my age, you're like, oh man, I need to eat healthier. I need to do some things to be healthier, for sure. So that's good.
And she always had some nice memories, like your sons, of taking piano lessons from Marty Fogelsong.
Right. Yeah, Marty's taught a bunch of folks too, and her mother Lucille.
Mhm.
You know, you take Rose Kittrell and Christy, man, and then mother-daughter, and then Lucille and Marty, and you know, you've got 2 or 3 families there that have just taught a lot of people piano in this community, for sure.
I was sharing with your son that Marty came and brought Stanley pecan sandy cookies yesterday. She had had a little recital on Thursday night and had leftovers.
Oh,
And so she stopped in because she knew how much Stanley and I
Absolutely.
love pecan sandies, as I'm sure you do from the recitals.
Absolutely,
so.
yeah, that's great. Well, so you guys got started in life, and you had your daughter, and you were still selling insurance by then, or had you
Yeah.
run for clerk?
Actually ran for clerk in 1998.
98. So Betsy was
Betsy was not
here yet. Okay,
2003.
okay, gotcha.
Born in 2003.
Okay.
And
So tell us about running for clerk. Who convinced you? How did you decide to do that? What brought that on?
Well, in 1997, there was a big controversy because there was a change in the compensation of elected officials. And that was, there were some editorials written to the local paper about the courthouse people being the courthouse gang. And basically, I think several people had already decided to retire at that time, which is, I think, why they all voted to accept a
Because they were moving on. It wouldn't look like they were doing it for themselves.
Yeah. It's kind of like they took the hit for the next generation.
Yeah.
And so basically, there were 3 spots open: presiding commissioner, treasurer, and county clerk. And I had the business across the street. And at the time, I was doing a lot of volunteer work, you know, in the historical society, in the Rotary Club, and different organizations.
Right.
And I thought, wow, you know, I could make my job public service and wouldn't be running in all these different
Yes.
directions. So it just looked like a really good opportunity. I had no clue what the different offices in the building did. I just decided that, young and naive or whatever else, I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring. And I remember basically coming into office with, it was a completely different time. My predecessor, Lois Miner, she did a great job. She was had a different style. She did not use a computer. She had a 10 key in the typewriter and kept a lot of the books. And
if I'm not mistaken, I think we got our first computer at home in about 94. It was an Acer. So this was 98.
This was 98, so that would not have been that unusual.
No, and you wouldn't have had cell phones yet. You might have had bag phones.
Bag phone.
Maybe beepers in 98.
Well, and I can remember even, we didn't have we lived at Parkview Apartments, and we didn't have home internet, but we could go to the insurance office and it was dial-up.
Dial-up, yes.
14.4 modem.
Yeah. So the computer age, even though it had been around a little while, it probably been around. I mean, in the early 80s, Dan McMillan and I opened the first Radio Shack in Marshfield out in the Carter Bentley Appliance Building, and that would have been 81. And, you know, we sold Tandy 1000s and the PC color computers, Tandy color computers. But, I mean, they weren't much. You know, they'd play a game or two, and you couldn't put the inventory of a store on one for sure. So
you could write a few letters and save that. But
like a word processor. That was what a lot of people really bought them for, to be able to print it off. But you know, that was 81, and you're talking about 98. That's 17 years later, and still not everybody had one in their home yet, and starting to. But
well, and the screens were so small. I remember in 1982, the Niagara Business Department got a like personal computer for students. And, the screen was just really small.
Right. Yeah. So you decided to run.
Decided to run.
Now we were in Rotary together. I started in Rotary in '97. That's when I took the Walmart store here in town and came back to Marshfield. And so you were still selling insurance then, and then you decided to run when we were in Rotary.
Mm-hmm. And again, it was very different. And leadership was good and everything like that, but the county was going through a difficult time. There'd been a statewide court case about some taxation that had gone on that needed to be repaid, so that was coming off the county budget.
There was no money.
The
Road moratorium.
we weren't taking roads. The circuit judge at that time had ordered that there be a juvenile detention center constructed, so they're paying off a bond on that. And so the county was really struggling financially. And I'd say, the budget may have been in the $3 million range.
Yeah. Now what is it?
Like last year we brought in around 18 million.
18, yeah.
We probably had around 50 employees at that time. We're up to about 130 now. Just the sheriff's budget's like $4.5 million now. So, and which at that time it was, I think, less than 600,000.
Wow.
So it's
911, it had been implemented by then.
911 was being implemented. We were changing from road numbers to road names.
Yes.
So that was one of my first tasks. Was basically every voter registration record had to be updated from to take on 911. The dispatching at that time was still being done on the third floor within the sheriff's office. The jailers doubled as the dispatchers.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it's a much better situation now with 911 has their own building and their own staff, and they don't have that distraction of
their first office was the old radio station down on the old highway.
That's
where
right. That's right.
Brian Peck has his real estate office now. I know that's when they first broke away from the courthouse. But the courthouse remodeling had been done by then.
Yes.
The third floor or because that was all done in the early '90s, I think.
Mm-hmm. And your Uncle Don was heavily involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a great job.
I think he served from '92 to 2000. Did Paul come in 2000?
He came in the same year.
Same year. Okay, then Don was 90 to 98, and Paul was 98 to now. Yeah. Okay. Well, a little bit of interest there, or for me at least, I like to hear that county history and kind of rehash and relive those days. Julie, you were working for Kerwin, and so what did you guys do? Like, as a family, did you go to the lake? Did you hang out in Springfield? What did you guys do? Just
Steely and I, or
yeah,
when they had Betsy?
Yeah.
Well, before Betsy came along,
You had
one thing that
friends,
we
circle of friends.
we had a circle of friends, and we would actually go to the townhouse in Springfield and listen to the Lefty Brothers. That was
They
a
were
big
still
thing for us.
going.
But a lot of our social life was being involved in different civic groups and doing
Churches.
church
Yeah.
and
Because I was a
local
longtime
events.
member of Business and Professional Women in Marshfield when they were still an active organization. And our first date was to a Rotary function of all things.
Yeah.
And Stanley, are you now the longest?
Really? Are you the longest?
Yeah, a little over 30 years in the Rotary Club.
Yeah.
And but like she said, our first date was casino night, wasn't it?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
the Rotary
Yeah,
Club used to host that.
I remember that.
And
Yeah.
it was at the Fairgrounds Kitchen, which
Right.
I haven't been in the Fairgrounds Kitchen for several years.
And you had a Rotary auction.
Yeah.
Oh, I
back
actually,
in those days.
that's a good memory. I actually worked on that because Dr. Kerwin was a Rotarian. So when they had the radio auction, do you remember that?
Yeah, that's what I was
and people
thinking
would
of.
call in
Right.
and
Yeah, we still had the radio station.
yeah, that was a really fun time in Marshfield.
So as far as elected officials, you worked with Don Roast and then Paul Ipock, presiding commissioner. So you really only worked with two presiding commissioners.
Actually, Don was retiring as I came in. So
Really,
so
just
Paul
Paul. Yeah,
was
that's
it.
right.
Which is really
Who are some of the other commissioners you worked with? Of course, you worked with me for a couple of years in 2009 and 10.
When I came in, John Haywood.
John Haywood
Southern-
from Seymour.
Southern District, and Billy Cunningham on the north. Then Tom Bird.
Tom Bird.
He served,
Yeah.
he did a great job. Randy Clare,
Yeah.
and see, Denzel Young, Susie Knust.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to leave somebody out.
No, then Randy. Randy was
Randy
that.
Owens.
Really, it hasn't really been that many, honestly,
Yeah,
has it,
Fraker
in
now.
25 years. So,
Yeah.
if you think about it,
And we've got a really good group in
Yeah,
the
you do.
courthouse
Yeah.
right now, just in general. Very very fortunate.
well, I sure enjoyed my time there for sure, and learned a lot, and it was very helpful going to Jeff City to have that knowledge. Really, really made a difference for me. So, you've been involved in the, well, first of all, I want to mention something else. We also have the 1984 Webster County Fair Queen with us, Julie Stuber at the time. So it's an honor to have,
Yes, well,
you know,
thank
one of the Webster County Fair Queens. When did they stop doing the Fair Queen contest?
I'm not really sure because it was probably in the early
90s.
maybe late, like 89 maybe. I
Yeah.
know we assembled all the previous Miss Webster County Fairs of Fairs.
I bet that was
wanna
the
say
Cherry
that
Blossom
I
Festival
think that was
event.
maybe no.
I bet it was. It wasn't?
It was
Well,
like
it needs
was
to
at
be.
at county fair, and they
Oh, okay.
still
Well, yeah.
were having the competition. But I want to say that was maybe 88 or 89.
Okay, yeah. We need to
And
do
they
that.
had us for our
Nicholas, if you're watching, we need to
statues.
have all the Webster County Fair Queens
Chime
get
in.
together and have a alumni reunion of the Webster County Fair Queens. Janice Robinson,
Yes.
was always our Miss Missouri, one of our most famous Webster
Yes.
County Fair Queens. So yeah,
But,
cool.
like Sally Clemens was one,
Mhm.
and Carla Wilkerson, Carla Wickstrom with
Yes,
Wilkerson.
yes.
My cousin Leanne Martin was one.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
The Stoner girls from Rogersville, they won one year. Their
Yeah.
father was an attorney.
I remember that. Yeah. Well, okay, so Historical Society, Stan, you've been very involved in that. You told me you were earlier, even more involved in the earlier days. So maybe when they purchased the library building, tell me about that. Tell me some of your favorite memories working with the Historical Society, because I'm sure there's been a lot of stories when President Bush came. Was certainly a great time for them. They put together the big display over there and all.
Well, in the early 90s, the Historical Society did not have a museum. They were just a group that met.
And by the way, these booklets, I talked about these either last week or the week before last week. These are a fantastic set of books put out by the Historical Society.
And those were done in the 70s.
Done in the 70s, from 75 to 84, I believe, are the edition dates. And this one is the very first edition, has a great story on the early history of Webster County. So go ahead. I mean, I wanted to throw that out there because these are just great resources.
So the Historical Society had been strong for a period of time, but in the early 90s, an opportunity came up because with the construction of the new library. So the old Kinderhook Library became open, and it was actually owned by the city. Now, it was not in good repair, and there was a lot of concern about what we might be getting into. And it took quite a bit of salesmanship to get the city to take the risk to allow the Historical Society a chance to fix it up. And if you kind of remember back in the 80s or whatever, if you went into the library, you know, it had kind of that old book smell. You
Oh
know,
yeah, kind of a
and
dungeon feel.
kind of a musty. And if you went down into the basement, you know, it was really damp.
Yeah.
And it had suffered a little bit from just a lack of good maintenance. And I remember going to one of the civic clubs at that time as the president of the Historical Society, saying we were going to take on this museum, this building, and turn it into a museum, and just being torn apart. Saying,
Get out of here. We're going to throw tomatoes at you.
It'll never work. You know, the building's going to fall.
Of course, you're
down.
kind of wanting money, you know, probably asking for money.
Yeah.
Now, what year would that have been, you think?
That probably was about 94.
Before you were clerk.
Yeah. And actually, there was a core of people who kind of came together, like Tal Greer, your Uncle Don, and his family, and core group that really put a lot of, and donated a lot of labor. And we got the water problem solved and got a good new roof on the building, and, you know.
The city cooperated with you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because they officially own the building, or did then at least.
No, but the labor was pretty much all
Oh,
volunteer.
yeah, I know that,
Well,
but
and
yeah.
you've got prisoners sometimes.
That's right.
Back in those days.
We got inmates from OCC that came over and helped us a few times
Yeah.
to work on it.
And they were
Yeah.
happy to get pizza. Stanley would buy them pizza.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They'd be so happy to have pizza.
I bet.
Now, it did cost me a wedding ring.
Oh, no.
So, there's,
Well, tell us that story. That sounds like an interesting story.
so basically, the group of us were going in and we were pulling up the old flooring. Because, you know, there's hardwood floors there now, but they were covered by underlayment and tile. So we were stripping all that tile off and tearing up the underlay and pulling all those nails and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on a Saturday, and we worked and worked and worked all day long. And I remember we'd gotten a lot done. We hauled off truckloads of debris and that
To
type
the
of thing.
city dump.
Yeah.
And I remember going home, and we were living in Parkview Apartments at the time, and sitting down in the chair and just being exhausted. And I told Julie, I said, it's a really good tire.
Really good tire. Yeah, I know that.
And I
feel.
set my arms on the chair, and I went, oops.
Oh, no.
All right, I guess sometime during the day, taking my gloves on and off, loading all
You
that
pulled the
stuff,
ring
I
off.
pulled
Wow.
the ring off. And so we went back up there at 10 o'clock at night with flashlights and crawled all through the building trying to see. if
Something
we had-
tells me your wife was very understanding.
Yes.
Maybe
So we
initially it
never,
was a sad moment, but I bet she was understanding.
yeah, we never did find it. But,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But he got a new one for
yeah,
Christmas.
yeah. Well,
yeah, she kept me.
well, that's good. That's the main thing for sure. That's a good story. So in your time working over there and all the time you spent, what's some of the most interesting things that you can recall? Like, is there certain artifacts that someone's donated, or is there anything, you know, whether it's Hubble stuff or the presidential visit, or is there anything that just really still sticks out in your mind as being maybe interesting, or so, you know,
I think the memorabilia from the Bush's visit.
Bush's visit, yeah.
That's kind of.
Yeah, well, it's a highlight for sure.
highlight.
Yeah.
And I will say, I mean, I've not been nearly as involved the last couple decades, really.
Yeah.
But there's a really good core group there. I like the fact they've got that little genealogical.
The annex, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
And it just seems to be continuing to grow.
I think they're doing really well. Of course, we had them in here and did a tour with them. They called me wanting to tour this facility a couple of months ago, and it was a real treasure, a real pleasure, and a treasure for them, I think, because they a lot of them hadn't been in the building since they graduated. Some of them, you know, in the 50s. Of course, Don Leonard Roast, you know, in the 40s, and I mean, there's just a lot of history here that I think it really piqued their interest. If you like history, then you like those kind of things. If you don't really care about history, then it doesn't mean much. But it's pretty simple, you know, pretty simple. We had a great time with them, and I know they told me that they get a lot of stuff down there, and they're probably running out of room again, and there's a lot of folks that want to leave things with them, which they appreciate, but you know, that's something they're probably going to have to look at, you know, some of these days. What are they going to do with some of that stuff? I know it's, you know, going to be a tough decision to figure out what to do with that. Well, so since you've been elected, you know, obviously, I wanted to talk for just a minute about how things have changed. We're not going to get into politics specifically, but with the climate of our culture and how it's changed since the time you were elected, when, as you mentioned, there were barely computers even being used, to now we have social media that pretty much drives the whole arena. I mean, we all get our news from there. We've got a real problem with even things like distracted driving, because people can't lay that phone down. They're constantly checking Facebook. They're constantly checking their messages. when they shouldn't be, quite frankly. But politically, I think it's helped contribute to this divide, a tremendous divide in our political spectrum where, you know, if you're not 100% on my team, then you are really the enemy. And it's like, used to be maybe people felt that way, or if they were involved in a campaign. But now, just in daily life,
Right.
you know, because of social media and people that get on there and that are so vocal about a candidate or about, you know, our elected officials, you know, Congress, the folks that are elected even sometimes locally, you know. What do you think? I mean, where are we headed? Where's this going to go? Because it seems like we're going down a path that we, maybe a point of no return. I hope not. What do you think about that?
Just on the fly, I'd say there's 2 or 3 different themes. One would be 2 or 3 different things that are happening at the same time. One is the demographics, and that we're getting larger. So Webster County used to be a relatively small rural county, heavily agricultural based. A lot of the folks were like Julie and I, came from long-term families and were established and knew each other. And if you went to the grocery store, Carl Young's grocery store, on a Saturday afternoon, it was a 3-hour affair because
You got a handshake, he got a hug, or she got a hug, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so now Webster County is actually one of the largest small counties in the
it
state.
is.
So we're
Larger than Laclede, it's larger than Polk,
Yep, larger than Lawrence.
larger than Lawrence. I mean, it's actually recognized, we had talked about this on an earlier show, as one of the top 20 counties in the state to help get a candidate elected.
Wow.
You know, there's out of 115 counties,
Mhm.
we're right up there at the top as needing Webster County. And if you follow, and you know this better than anybody, I know you know those election numbers and you follow all that, but best I recall, you know, Webster County, however the wind's blowing, Webster County elects you. That's probably who's going to be elected in a statewide race or so forth.
So I think that the demographics change things because it is harder to know your neighbors than it used
Yeah.
to be. And sometimes I feel like I can go into Walmart on a Saturday afternoon and not know a soul, you know.
Yeah.
So that's just a factor of the size,
Right.
you know. And then of course people are becoming more isolated from each other because of the technology, and that's perhaps kind of irreversible. And then at the same time, we used to have a radio station. The circulation of the local newspaper probably had more impact. A higher percentage of the people in the community were taking the paper and listening to what
Right.
the paper had to say. And so now those local institutions are being bypassed, and you've got more of a centralized national media, and even your Springfield television stations are not really local stations.
That's right.
Not
A
like
lot
they
of
were
it-
when we
A lot
all
of the
grew up.
content is kind of
Right.
driven from the network and that type of thing. So yeah, you're seeing more of that kind of extremes. One, the first rule of politics is not everybody loves you like your mother.
Right.
But
It's worse than it used to be too.
you could kind of counterbalance that if when you go into local government or public service or whatever that may be, you have to know that there are going to be some people, just because of the job that you hold, that think you're a liar and a thief.
Yep.
But in a small community, you can counterbalance that because people know you, or they know your family, or they know your character. You have a chance to talk. The more you become isolated from people, I think the less benefit of the doubt. That you
Right. Right.
Then, like you said, I think actually we were talking before the camera started about, has Webster County always been a predominantly Republican county versus Democrat county? And it looks like, if you go back to the Civil War, it was more Republican because of the pro-union sentiment
Right.
at that time. But through the decades, it seemed like it would wax and wane.
Yeah.
And that the Democrats and the Republicans would trade back
Right.
and forth, and it was relatively balanced.
I think probably even from World War I until the mid-60s, you probably, I'd say you'd probably lean more Democrat, especially through the Depression and World War II, because the national ticket was that way,
And again in the 1970s.
yeah,
But then the most recent presidential election is kind of an outlier in lots of ways, but Joe Biden actually received less than 20% of the vote
Yeah,
in Webster County. Which is just
unbelievable.
shocking.
But there again,
stat.
you're either, we're just so divided. There's no middle anymore. There used to be a middle, and it's just you just got to be here or here. And if you're not, you're the enemy. And it just doesn't. It's just really kind of scary. I mean, it really is, and it's. I hate that we've become that way in our nation. They used to say politics was all local. It's not anymore. It used to be, but in the last 10 years, it's changed, and it's because of social media. Now the national derivative is it's really driving it. I mean,
Well, don't you think that a lot of people, I mean, we used to have mutual respect for individuals' opinions, and now then I think some of that has really kind of changed.
absolutely. In churches, we didn't really talk politics.
Right.
You really didn't know what your preacher was, or people. You didn't talk politics in church.
Right.
Today they do.
Right.
Good or bad, they do. And
Right.
so I don't know if that contributes to this whole thing or not.
Can I jump in and
Absolutely.
since part of the purpose of the broadcast is to preserve history,
Yep.
I want to
Yep.
go out and put something on the record to kind of
Absolutely.
defend myself. Basically, there's always urban legends about, and I'm not talking about anything recent and et cetera,
Right.
et cetera. Urban legends about shenanigans that may have gone on in the election business or whatever else, because elections is part of what a county clerk does.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came into office, people would tell me stories about, oh, back in such and such day, all the South Side ballots, they'd stop at the James River and they'd burn the original ballots, and
I was probably in the room when you heard some of those stories, or they were being
Right.
repeated. Yeah.
And I always thought, wow, that's pretty shocking.
Yeah.
And then a few years ago, someone started telling that story about me, that was happening
Really?
during my tenure, and someone, someone even put it in a book, one of these locally self-published books that, on such and such election during my time, all of the South Side ballots came in and we switched them at the James
Oh my
River.
gosh.
And it's-
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
We-
Well, that's why you've carried the ticket in Webster County for probably the last 10 or 12 or 14 years. You've got more votes than any other candidate on any ballot in any election. So, yeah, maybe a handful of people might think that. But again, it's probably because of the social media thing in the last few years. I don't think in general that's the feeling. But,
We do our absolute best to
Yeah.
make sure everything's right.
and I think people don't realize what the county clerk does. You or anyone, any county clerk in the state. You're the HR director of the county. You have to keep up with all the personnel files for all the various government agencies and so forth. You're the purchasing agent. Well, just you say it. Tell us what all a county clerk does. I think a lot of people don't really realize. Yeah.
And you would think after being elected 7 times, I'd have an elevator speech where I could just simply pop that off.
Well,
But it's basically the Office of Miscellaneous. So anything that isn't handled by one of the other offices kind of falls into our purview. So, we're the finance officer, budget officer, HR. We work really closely with the county commission on basically anything from grants and interacting with the state agencies and working with MoDOT and all those kinds of things. And then they throw elections into the mix. And so I really like it, and that it is different every day.
Yeah.
And you say, well, how, it sounds like a fairly vanilla job,
mm-hmm.
but there really is a lot of variety to it.
You're the county administrator too, really, because the commissioners aren't there every day, and you have to take phone calls. And,
Counties are set up weird. They're set up by the legislature.
right.
One size doesn't fit all, because there's so much difference in the needs of these different communities. That it's left really decentralized, and so every county kind of makes up its own way of getting things done. The way we've chosen to do it here is the county clerk's kind of like the city administrator and the commission's an oversight board,
Mhm.
and they also kind of double as road commissioners.
And part of that's because we're a third-class county. Now, tell us the difference in a third, second, and first-class county.
It's all based not on population, but on assessed value.
Assessed value.
So basically, they have little plateaus. If you're above $1 billion or et cetera in assessed value, you can be a first-class county. Second class is just kind of like an intermediary where you're crossing from third into second. I'm sorry, second into first.
Mhm.
If you cross into third into first, you have to go into second.
To the second.
It's-
What's our assessed evaluation now, roughly?
We're about 587.
587. And I think when I was commissioner 12 years ago, I think it was like 350. It's increased that much in 12 years. So 550. And so when do you meet the benchmark to become a second class county?
That that threshold keeps raising.
Okay.
It's indexed.
Used to be about
It used to
600,000.
be 600,000. We'd be right knocking
Yeah,
on the door
we'd
if we
be
changed
close.
the class.
And that's what no Christians first now.
Christians first.
So that would be what, maybe Taney?
Taney, Christian, Taney, and Green are the first class.
They're
counties
first,
in the city.
okay.
And Stone County is close, even though
Really?
they have a low population because they have such a high amount of commercial property.
Ah, okay.
Camden
So
County,
are our cities in Stone. That would help.
Camden County is first class county.
It is first now, okay.
Because of the
Yeah.
commercial development. So population wise, we're significantly larger than Stone, but
Yeah.
valuation wise and income wise, they
Right.
outpace us.
Okay, that's interesting. And so we're still a ways away from being second class then. But at second class, you get a few more positions like county auditor and things like
Mhm.
that. So,
Road engineer.
road engineer, so, okay, interesting. Um, is there anything else in the history of Webster County that you can think of that would be interesting for the folks to hear? Again, we've only got 8 minutes left, so we don't have much time, but I found it interesting. I look back in this journal and some of the families that settled Webster County when it first began are really some family names that are here today, and it's not mine or Stan's family name, but I thought that was kind of interesting that we've still got a lot of folks that descended from the very first families. And if I can find it, because I just read it a minute ago, I thought I might read some of those to you.
And I will say, one thing that's kind of interesting, we do have a Revolutionary War veteran that's buried in
Yes,
Webster County,
yes.
and Nathan Clifton.
Right.
And his family, his descendants
They're
still
still
live in
here.
this area.
Yeah.
And what an interesting life he would have had. Like I said, a Revolutionary War veteran, had sons that were on both sides in the Civil War,
Right.
all buried together out there by Bell Ford.
About by Belford.
And,
So the family, you got to remember, people came here in the 1830s is when people settled this part of the country. We didn't become Webster County until 1855. So around 20 years, there were people moving in here that started forming a civilized society. But those families, the Fosters, the Alcorns, Lettermans, we can all think about where they settled. The Lettermans, Niangua, obviously. The Greers with Grier, that's Rogersville. The Sylvies, the Puryears, the Haggards, the Blunts, the Bales, the Rhodes family, Jumps, Hayneses, one of the earliest settling families out north at in the St. Luke
St.
area.
Luke area.
Yeah. The Kellers, the Joneses. Of course, you have lots of Joneses, the Fordland Joneses, and they're probably all tied together. Casses, the Smiths, the Bodenhammers, Pattersons, Pryors, the Joyner Gentry families, the Cardwells, that's Fordland, Haleys, Cantrells, Martins, Hargis, Hartleys, Hoovers, Davis family, many others. But I think, and then you get over here, you've got the Days, came from Kentucky in 1836, McMahons. McMahon was an early
family,
family.
McMahon.
That's who, McMahon, sorry.
McMahon.
And then we had, did anybody know we had a governor from Webster County?
Actually, McClurg,
Yep.
So the first county seat was Hazelwood.
Hazelwood,
which
yeah.
is a community that no longer
Which isn't
exists.
far from where your mother's family
Correct.
was
Yeah.
raised.
That's right. That's right. So north of Seymour, there was a community that was on what was then called the Lynn Creek Road. It's just a little trading post, and that was the first county seat. And Joseph McClurg was the proprietor. And then he left Webster County, and the Hazelwood settlement kind of dried up. County seat was moved to Marshfield. He went, I think he went out west and then came back to Missouri and was one of the Reconstruction post-Civil War governors.
Okay.
And he's actually buried in the Lebanon cemetery.
Oh, he is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so some families, again, some more families, the Childresses, that's Seymour, the Goods, the McCormicks, Brashears, Letchworth, we certainly have Letchworth Loop in the school, Callaways. We've got, my mother's, the Roasts are related to the Callaways on my mom's side. Denny's, all those names, a lot of them you can still recognize that have those ties. We could talk all day. I mean, we really could. And it's really been a pleasure to have you guys in here today.
Oh, thank you,
And-
Lyndall. I think
and we'll do
this
it
is
again.
wonderful what you're doing. Just wonderful.
Well, thank you. We'll do it again. We've got, 52 weeks in a year. And now next week, we're not going to have a show. Melanie and I and the boys are going to take a little vacation. So we won't be here next Saturday, but we'll hope to be here the following Saturday. And we will, we'll have some very good guests. Believe me, they'll be good. Can't tell you for sure yet. We've been talking to several people,
It'll be an
but
upgrade.
yeah, but we have to work it out with schedules of everyone. So I can't promise you who it'll be, but we'll continue to try to bring folks that have some knowledge of the old days in Webster County and Marshfield, and hopefully this is interesting to you. And if you guys have any suggestions, send us your cards and letters. We'll be happy to accept criticism. Not real well, but we will. But we definitely would like suggestions and positive feedback for sure. So we've still got 3 minutes. Anything you guys would like to add? You gonna do anything fun this weekend or
Well,
next
I'd
week?
like to add,
Yeah.
we talked about music, and I failed to mention
Yes.
that had the great pleasure of singing with your father
Oh, yeah.
in the United Methodist Church choir, sat next to him for 20 years, and then we sang in a quartet together and did a lot of little churches and
Yeah.
different ceremonies and things, and it was a great experience.
Well, you and my father were blessed, as Tom Henson would say, to have instruments in your throats. And I think not many people get that opportunity in life. And I think probably the good Lord means for you to share that with others. And so my dad always did. He loved singing in the church choir and did all of his life. And he sang funerals back in the day when he was a young man. And you've done the same, and you guys are both in a league of your own when it comes to singing tenor in a quartet or in a choir. There's no question about that.
Music is great therapy.
Yeah, it is. A lot of enjoyment. But I've always appreciated you and the other members, Rex Newcomb, John Toller, and you've had some others that stepped in, taking my dad and sharing that talent with him. It was a great experience, and I'll always appreciate you all doing that. And we fortunately do have some music out there, some CDs that you guys recorded. So that is in our history books that we can, history files, I guess we should say, that we can share with others down the road. On one of the shows I mentioned, my mom was able to sing with her grandfather, who was Sam Roast, who was the patriarch of the Marshfield roasts. Now his father was Jacob Frederick, who was the patriarch of all of the roasts in Webster County, and then some migrated to Springfield or whatever. But Grandpa Sam was my great grandfather, my mother's grandfather. Well, he had a tremendous bass voice. Was a really good singer, and so he and she were able to record some music, and it was played on the old KEMM radio station back in the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
she sang alto and sang with him, and that was played on the Norman Turnbow gospel hour or whatever he called it. You know, he did a message, and so we have that music recorded that we can always hear them sing together. But being blessed to come from the Roast family and the Fraker family, we were always blessed with a lot of music, gospel music, church music, and the hymns, and so yeah, it's a great thing. But, well, Mr. Logan, it's 2:00. Thank you again for helping us today. We will see all of you in 2 weeks, and we appreciate your support. We don't do this for anything other than to document history and enjoy each other's company and fellowship when we do it, and reminisce about the good old days. So thank you, and we will see you in 2 weeks.